This is Glencoe, known as the Weeping Glen. It's one of Scotland's most haunting landscapes, and not just for the scenery. In the early hours of the 13th of February 1692, around 38 of the MacDonalds of Glencoe were murdered in an act that still sits heavily in the collective Scottish consciousness. Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the story of the Massacre of Glencoe.
These days, even at this time of year, Glencoe's alive with tourism. A lot of it linked to the view or some kind of climbing or winter sports, and some of it linked to its darker past.
330 years ago, this place would have been alive with a different kind of activity. This was the home of the MacDonald clan. Although not everyone was called MacDonald. That's probably the first bit of oversimplification we want to get out of the way.
Popular culture likes to portray the massacre as the result of a long feud between the MacDonalds and the Campbells, two of the biggest clans in Scotland, with history going back beyond Robert the Bruce and the Wars of Independence, both wanting dominance in the Highlands.
It's really not that simple. In fact, it's a whole lot darker.
The MacDonalds and the Campbells didn't get on. That's true. They reaved or stole cattle from each other regularly. They were the big fish, circling each other for generations. The MacDonalds had been the lords of the Isles, but more than that, a whole lot of the Western Highlands as well. The Campbells pretty much lived next door. They were fierce rivals in a pretty fierce part of the world.
But this was less about two rival clans, more about two rival dynasties.
James VII of Scotland and II of England had been crowned king in 1685. There had been some concerns about his being a Catholic in a newly Protestant country, but people let it slide. His daughter, Mary, was a Protestant, so when he eventually expired it would be business as usual. Then he produced a male heir, and then he started making moves against Protestant bishops. And things weren't quite so cosy.
So they asked his son-in-law, the very Protestant William of Orange, to come over and take over.
William landed in Devon in October 1688 and did just that, in what would become known as the Glorious Revolution because of the lack of bloodshed south of the border.
The clans had sworn allegiance to James, and they didn't like going back on their word. Added to that, there were rumours about a possible invasion with the help of James's new bestie, Louis XIV of France. So they were understandably a bit hesitant, hedging their bets.
Step forward John Campbell of Breadalbane. He'd already sworn allegiance to William and was all too happy to play the fixer, just as long as there was something in it for him. William had agreed to an amnesty for all the reaving and rebellion as long as the Jacobite clan swore an oath of allegiance to him and Mary. In exchange, they could have 12 grand to split between them, about £2 million or $2.5 million in today's money. Breadalbane arranged a meeting with the clan chiefs, one of whom was Alistair MacDonald, chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe and known as MacIan. Just to confuse you. Breadalbane allegedly told them they could swear allegiance to William, and if James turned up, join the uprising. He would be doing the same thing.
Nobody bought it.
And no one could agree how much of the money anyone was entitled to. And Breadalbane said he should have MacIan's share because of all the cattle he'd stolen from his land.
The clans dragged their heels, and William went in a bit of a cream puff.
So he piled the pressure onto John Dalrymple, the Master of Stair, his Secretary of State for Scotland, who really didn't like Highlanders.
He decided what they needed was a deadline.
William issued a proclamation telling the clan chiefs they had to swear allegiance to a sheriff by the 31st of December 1691, or they and their clans would be considered traitors and face the consequences. That left them in a bit of a tight spot, but eventually word got back to James, who sent some messengers to tell the chiefs they should take the oath. But then his messengers were delayed, partly by a Clan MacDonald chief, Glengarry, on their way north. It was almost as though he didn't want his rivals, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, to find out.
Eventually, MacIan did get word, but not until the 28th of December. He had 3 days to go.
He made for Fort William, planning to have the oath administered by Colonel John Hill, the governor of the fort. Hill told MacIan that he couldn't administer the oath, but that he'd have to go to Inverary, 60 miles away. Then he gave him a letter addressed to the Sheriff of Argyllshire, Sir Colin Campbell. So he did his best to get there through the snow with his sons, but they were stopped and detained by soldiers, who were also Campbells.
When he finally did get to Inverary, after the deadline, he was told the sheriff was away.
He waited for 3 days until the 6th of January before he was able to take the oath of allegiance, but the sheriff sent a letter to Edinburgh confirming it had been done. And other clan chiefs had missed the deadline as well. It probably felt a bit like handing your homework in late, but getting an extension because everyone else had done the same thing.
All good then, nothing to worry about.
So when 120 soldiers arrived at the end of the month, led by Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon, whose niece was married to one of MacIan's sons, he probably wasn't overly pleased, but they had orders for free quarter.
Free quarter was an established practice where people could offer bed and board to the troops in place of taxes.
And as Highland tradition dictated, he would have felt honour bound to offer them shelter and food anyway.
For nearly 2 weeks, the soldiers slept in the houses and ate the food of the MacDonald clan. And then, on the 12th of February 1692, they received their orders.
They were to fall upon the MacDonalds precisely at 5 o'clock the following morning, and put all to the sword under 70 years of age. The following morning, they launched their attack.
MacIan was one of the first to die. The story goes that his servant woke him and told him the soldiers were on the move. He's said to have asked her to get them drams. Highland hospitality to the end. As he was putting on his trousers, the soldiers walked in and shot him. They're thought to have killed at least 38 people, but the number could be much higher, and we'll never know for sure. Others escaped into the night in a full-on blizzard. Some would die of exposure, and some would be put to death as the soldiers moved up the valley.
2 more groups, one led by Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton and another by Major Duncanson, were supposed to have joined the attack, with 400 men blocking off the top of the glen and a further 400 sweeping their way up through it to kill as many of the clan as possible. But they arrived late and in the process avoided any involvement. Some of the soldiers are thought to have warned the people they were staying with, told them to run away, but again, we'll never know. Those that survived stayed in the mountains until they thought it was safe to come down and bury their dead, then slowly rebuilt their homes along with their lives. Campbell of Glenlyon went to Edinburgh, where he possibly left his orders in a tavern. However it happened, they were found by some Jacobite sympathisers who took them to France, where they were published in the Paris Gazette.
The resulting pressure led to a Scottish Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry. It was determined that the killings were murder under trust, which at the time was considered treason.
No one ever paid for the Massacre of Glencoe. John Dalrymple lost his job for a while, and Breadalbane did some time in Edinburgh Castle because his alleged plan to swap sides in the event of an invasion had sort of got out, and William wasn't a happy bunny.
None of the buildings from the time of the massacre survive today. The one behind me is a very recent reconstruction. And the families that lived here and their way of life were wiped out by the Highland clearances and replaced by sheep.
The phrase, "never trust a Campbell," entered the Scottish lexicon.
But only about a dozen of the 120 troops were actually Campbells.
The plan seems to have been around for a while. On the 2nd of December, the Secretary of State had written to John Campbell telling him the Clan Donnell must be rooted out.
When they missed the deadline, the Master of Stair wrote to Sir Thomas Livingston, military commander in Scotland, telling him, "My Lord Argyle tells me Glencoe hath not taken the oaths," at which I rejoice. It was much easier to shift the blame onto rival clans, when really, this was state-sponsored slaughter.
The MacDonalds of Glencoe were easy targets. They were particularly unruly, had a reputation for cattle rustling, and they were isolated. There were no roads here then.
There were, of course, worse massacres before and have been worse massacres since in Scottish history, but the reason this one sticks out is the absolute betrayal and that phrase, murder under trust. It's a sad story, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea. This is not what I would call a sad place. It's a heart-wrenching place, but for a whole load of reasons. And if you come to Scotland, even if you're from Scotland, this place should be on your bucket list. Even if it's just to gawp at the Three Sisters or the Meeting of the Waters or take a picture of the wee white house for the gram. Trust me, you won't regret coming here. It is absolutely achingly beautiful.